somebody gone back in time and told the people on the continent of Africa, hey, hi YouTube, welcome. It took us a while to get connected. Welcome YouTube. Sorry, but I often think about if somebody had gone back in time and said, hey, these people are going to show up in these boats. They're not even going to know how to ship very well. They don't know the seas very well. They use our maps. They get lost on a regular basis. But these people are coming, and you need to be aware that they're coming so that you can plan accordingly. Don't trade with them. They're going to create this new system called slavery, and they're going to miseducate your children. I feel like had somebody said something like that, perhaps we would not be in this moment. But what do I know? Because I feel like we're giving warnings and people are not paying attention the way that they need to be paying attention. And so I'm concerned about that. And so y'all, Amina, get the frog in the throat button ready. I might have to clear my throat in a second. We're good for now, but just be ready. I want to talk today about this attack on education. And I want to start with a quote that I have often shared from a very dear colleague of mine. Her name, she is now an ancestor, Khalila Braun. And she has this quote or this saying that she really sort of helped to coin. I don't know that she came up with it, but I remember she being one of the more powerful people who would say it. And the idea of the quote was that every single school is culturally responsive. The question is, to whose culture are they responding? Over the weekend, we got word from the Department of Education, and the Department of Education issued a Dear Colleague letter. And this letter, it was rich. I want to talk a little bit about what they said, but essentially they are defining racism and as anything that creates a disadvantage for white children or Asian children. Now, we saw this really rear its head in the SFFA case. That was the case that went up against Harvard University and I believe North Carolina. I can't remember which school in North Carolina. But essentially, there were two colleges, one considered Ivy League, one considered a very excellent private public school. And these cases essentially these schools were sued by a group of Asian students and white students because they said that the consideration of race worked to disproportionately disadvantage white and Asian students. And it was the consideration of race in admissions. Right? Now, to be clear, race is one of maybe 40, 50 factors that schools will tend to look at when they're trying to determine what their student body should look like. They'll look, for example, to see if you're a legacy. Now, if you're a legacy student, meaning your parents went there or somebody wealthy in your family paid for you to be there, you don't have to have any qualifications. In fact, when they went back and looked at the students at Harvard University who were only admitted because they were legacies, meaning their parents had gone there before them and had paid a significant amount of money for them to be admitted there, basically they didn't have, less than half of them had the academic qualifications. But affirmative action for wealthy white people has always been acceptable in this society. It is a problem for those of us who do not sit in that category. But today is Kuumba Day in our Kwanzaa cosmology. And Kuumba means creativity, which I've already shared with my audience, means that we must do always as much as we can in the way that we can in order to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than it was when we inherited it. And that means we're going to have to get very, very creative in this day and time. And by that, I mean the following. Rarely have any of us who are a part of Gen X or younger applied to a job that had a phrase that said something along the lines of whites only apply, or if you're not white, you need not apply. And yet most of us have experienced applying to jobs where mystically, magically, wondrously, amazingly, despite the demographics and despite their lack of qualifications, white Americans were the bulk of people in those institutions, right? Whether it be a law firm, a banking institution, an architectural firm, an accounting firm, they just tend to have a whole bunch of white people working there. Now, as of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, they no longer could say things like whites only, but they have a whole mystically, magically, amazingly, wondrously, and despite all the demographics and lack of qualifications, white people seem to be there in abundance. They don't have to say it because it's understood. They don't have to explicitly declare it because it's understood. And when it's understood, you don't have to call things the black school. When it's understood, you don't have to call things the black job. You don't have to, well, that's a very loaded phrase right now. But when it's understood, you don't have to call things, you don't have to name them the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility program. You would just be diverse, equity, inclusive, and have accessibility. And we're in a time right now where, as you heard from that clip in just the beginning of this segment, YouTube, I'm sorry you all did not get a chance to hear it. But as you heard from that clip, what did the woman say? She said, stop calling it, they have an issue with the words. Stop calling it diversity, equity, inclusion. Call it the workplace pipeline. Call it whatever you want to call it, but make sure you are using you understand how they are approaching these things so that you can do what's necessary to protect the communities we have to protect. This is going to really matter in terms of education. Amina, can you hit the frog button? I got to clear my throat. Lord have mercy. Yes, thank you. For those of you who are listening on YouTube only, we have this "Let Me Clear My Throat" song that we play every time I get on the airwaves and my throat is a little dry. And today is one of those days. So thank you, Amina, for that. And so we need to be clear about what's happening in the state of education because over the weekend, we got this letter from Craig Trainer. Not Megan Trainer, Craig Trainer. And Craig Trainer basically put out this letter from the Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights. And he says that in recent years, American educational institutions have discriminated against students on the basis of race, including white and Asian students, many of whom come from disadvantaged backgrounds and low income families. Now, this is interesting. Let's pause here because they says in recent years, American educational institutions have discriminated against students on the basis of race. Now we know that that's true because we know that Black students are disproportionately suspended and expelled from schools. We know that schools that are in urban communities where the students are disproportionately Black or Latino, that those schools tend to have a higher percentage of uncertified teachers. So we definitely know that there is some discrimination, but that's not the discrimination they talk about. The discrimination they're talking about is discrimination on the basis of race, which makes white students and Asian students feel uncomfortable. Now, my Asian friends, I got to be honest with you. It is unfortunate that some in your community have allowed yourselves to be snookered up by the white nationalists and that caused you joining with the Ed Blums of the world to file that lawsuit against Harvard and the other institution. And it's unfortunate that you did that because what we then found was that even after you sued and got rid of race as possibly as one of the factors for being considered in education, we still outperformed. Our numbers went up. Yours did not. Sorry, it's just what happens because we are used to having to work and get in systems that do not work for us. They talk about the fact that colleges and universities and K through 12 schools have routinely used race as a factor in admissions, financial aid, hiring, training, and other institutional programming. What they mean is that the previous era of racism, the previous era of Jim Crow racism that prevented non-white students from getting access to these schools, when the schools made decisions to address the previous era of racism by saying, we are going to allow for race to be one of maybe 30, 40 other factors that we consider, the mere addressing of the racism and the racial disparities that was caused by the pro-white nationalism of the Jim Crow era, addressing that racism with measures that are going to minimize the impact of that racism is in and of itself racist against the whites. Because white people, according to this ideology, have a presumptive right to sit in every position of power and access and opportunity. We know that's not the case, but that's what they're saying because they're white nationalists. That's essentially what it is. But this letter goes on to essentially threaten any K through 12 or collegiate institution, higher education institution that continues to teach things like Black history, that continues to teach things that are taking a diversity, equity, and inclusion approach, threatens to withhold federal funding from these institutions. Now, this is a real challenge because for decades, Black parents, including myself, Black organizers, including myself, and many of my colleagues and friends and dearest activists, we have been working for years to ensure that people like Lisa Delpit, who wrote books called Other People's Children, Cultural Conflict in the Classroom, Gloria Ladson Billings, who is a prolific writer, Sonia Douglas Horsford, Learning in a Burning House. We have fought for years to make sure that Black children are going to have access to an education that is specifically designed to meet their needs. Why? Because school cultures are culturally responsive. The question is to whose culture? And we have to be very clear that the educational and academic culture of those who descended from the enslaved are not the same as the academic needs of those who descended from slave owners. And as an educator, you are charged with meeting the needs of the students that you have, not some mythical, all-white, monolithic student body that doesn't actually exist pretty much anywhere unless you're in a state that has negligible numbers of Black and brown people. According to according to higher education. Sorry, I can read. I promise y'all that. I am a DEI high, which means I had to work twice as hard to get half as far. But according to Inside Higher Ed, which is the actual name of the media outlet. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights declared all race-conscious student programming, resources, and financial aid illegal over the weekend and threatened to investigate and rescind federal funding for any institution that does not comply within 14 days. Question: how many of you with kids have your schools PTA schedule in your calendar? How many of you who don't have kids have your school's PTA calendar in your phone? How many of you do? Because if you don't already have an active presence in the schools, baby, let me just tell you, you're going to have to raise up and you're going to have to show up in ways that you perhaps have abdicated to other people, and it's no longer going to be acceptable. The letter goes on to mention a wide range of university programs and policies that could all be subjected to an investigation. These include hiring, promotion, compensation, financial aid, scholarships, prizes, administrative support, discipline, housing, graduation ceremony. So like the HBCU, not the HBCU, but the Black graduation ceremonies where we have the ethnic kente cloth stoles and it's a slightly different celebration, that would come under fire. Programs that look at making sure that you have equitable access to housing if you come from a traditionally marginalized, economically disenfranchised community, and that economic disenfranchisement also has an overlay with race. These are things that they are going to be looking at. They said that according to Senator Patty Murray, who's a Democrat of the state of Washington, she says that this threat to rip away the federal funding of our public K through 12 colleges and educations that they receive flies in the face of the law. While it's anyone's guess what falls under the Trump administration's definition of DEI, there is simply no authority or basis for Trump to impose such a mandate unless we believe it. Right? Going back to the moment of gratitude this morning, we're going to stop letting people intimidate us. And that means we are giving permission to people to intimidate. We're not going to let these people intimidate us, particularly when they are sitting in seats of authority in spaces that we intend to occupy. She goes on to say, Brian Rosenberg, who's a former president of Macalester College, who's now a visiting professor of education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, wrote to say that this letter is truly dystopian. If enforced, it would upend decades of established programs and initiatives to improve success and access for marginalized students. And he says it goes well beyond the Supreme Court's ruling on admissions and declares illegal a wide range of common practices. They are trying to Jim Crowify education. They are going to make an effort to remove all of the progress that we have achieved since the 1960s to ensure that our children have equitable access to education. Now, it's not the end of the story. Janae Nelson, who is the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I highly encourage you to get a copy of this article. And actually, Jonah, if you could tweet this out, Janae Nelson put out a series of conversations, or a series of tweets, rather, that discuss some reports that her organization, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Latino Justice, Asian American Legal Defense Fund, put out. And this is a massively important report because it came out right in the aftermath of the decision to end affirmative action when it came to collegiate admissions, race-based affirmative action. And it's called Affirmative Action in Higher Education. And one of the things that she talks about is the fact that, one, this is wholly illegal. What they are trying to do has no basis in the law, and it flies in the face of decades of jurisprudence. But that's not going to matter unless the people then rise up and defend the needs of the children who are in these schools, because every school is culturally responsive. The question is, when they start responding to the culture of our children, then it's declared illegal? No, ma'am, no, sir, no ham, no spam, because we pay taxes to these schools. So while, yes, our faith-based institutions need to be teaching Black history, while, yes, our Divine Nine, our social service groups, our social service clubs, shout out to the NCNW, had some amazing events taking place over the weekend. In addition to all the organizations that are doing the work, yes, we are going to teach our children. Yes, we are going to be responsible for taking on and reclaiming the need to teach Black history to Black children. Howsoever, we pay taxes for these schools. And the same way that you can have a bunch of Christian nationalists who don't believe in science, who say that they're going to show up to the school board meeting, and the only type of creation they want their children to learn in science is the creation where God created the world and the heavens and the earth and the entire universe in 7 days, and that's the only thing they want taught in their schools. Guess what happens? That's the only thing that's taught in their schools, because they show the fuck up for their kids. And so that's what we're going to do as well. Because, yeah, we're going to teach it in our spaces, but I'll be damned if I'm paying taxes for educational services and you're not going to teach my children what they need. You're not going to teach our children in a way that ameliorates the decades of white Christian nationalism, white supremacist bullshit that destroyed our ability to have access to education in the first place. First of all, we didn't even want to be in your schools. We wanted equal. Y'all wanted separate. We wanted equal. You could have just funded the shit so that we had it all equitably distributed, but you didn't want to do that. So now we here, you here, and our children are not going back into the Jim Crow closet. We as parents are not sending our children back into the Jim Crow closet so little Timmy and little Susie can sit in the classroom and be taught the mythology of whiteness simply because your mom doesn't want you, little Timmy, or you, little Susie, to look into the education books that they have and see a picture of your grandma at the lynching. That's your problem. That's not our problem. But Janae Nelson president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, goes on to say, in addition to sharing this article, contrary to trainers' misrepresentation, because they are misrepresenting what the court actually said, Justice Kavanaugh made explicit in his SFFA concurring opinion, that's the decision that got rid of race-based affirmative action. They said in the opinions of the court that governments and universities still can, of course, act to undo the effects of past discrimination in many permissible ways that do not involve classifications by race. One of the things we have been advising that organizations do, and when I say we, I mean, yes, here on these airways, but I also run a whole ass law center. And at the law center, we are considering guidance that we give out to organizations that are trying to figure out what to do next. We have been looking at all of the other ways of describing our target population that don't require us to use racial constructs. And frankly, because racism is intimately tied with economics and class, there are a variety of ways of describing the population you want to serve, that you want to support, that you want to uplift without using race as a descriptor. I don't like it, but this is the world we're in. It's what happens when y'all don't vote. So this is the world that non-voters and the voters for Trump created. So thank you very much. We are now adjusting in real time. She goes on to say, Justice Clarence Thomas, who is a hoe, Clarence Thomas acknowledges in his concurring opinion that the use of race-neutral policies, stating that he said race-neutral policies may thus achieve the same benefits of racial harmony and equality without any of the burdens and strife generated by affirmative action policies. Meaning you can still do the work. You ain't gonna be able to call it that, which is why the woman said they don't like diversity, equity, inclusion, call it the work-pace pipeline. I don't care what you call it. Do the work of meeting the needs of the people who are going to need it. Similarly, Chief Justice Roberts affirmed in another decision, Allen v. Milligan, which is a decision of the LDF 1. They said that of voting rights, and they said that government actions undertaken to ensure opportunities are equally open to people of all races is a permissible practice consistent with the Equal Protection Clause. So despite the fact that Craig Traynor, not Megan, Craig Traynor, decided to put out this "I'm threatening you" letter. The only way it works is if schools back down and allow themselves to be intimidated. The law is on the side of equity, despite the fact that the white Christian nationalists can't stand the phrase equity or anything about diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility. That's a them problem that we are now going to respond to. But I tell you what, if a whole bunch of y'all show up to your school, you know what's going to happen? What the parents say is going to happen. I tell you what, some of the questions we need to be asking our schools is, okay, so you're getting rid of the diversity, equity, inclusion program. What are you doing to make sure that the issues those programs were addressing are still going to get addressed? Call it whatever the fuck you want to call it, but you better do the work of making sure that these test scores stay up. You better do the work of making sure that the discriminatory way in which you mete out expulsions and suspensions is not going to return. You better make sure. And you know what? Even if you don't do the work of making sure, I, the parent, am going to do the work of making sure. We, the parents together, and we are neighbors who ain't even gotten kids in these schools. But you know what? Who ain't else got kids in these schools? Moms for fucking Liberty. They don't got kids in a whole lot of the schools that they took over, but they show up. They know when the PTA meeting is at. They know when the elections are happening. And they know that they got funding and they got resources. But you know what we got? We got people power. We got people power. And it's damn well time that we start using said people power, because the reality is this is a game of who gonna check who. And we are going to have to be the check on the people. Predominantly white institutions don't have to say predominantly white. Do you realize that? Like, predominantly white institutions don't have to say whites only. They just mysteriously only seem to find the white candidates who are capable. Well, get to it, HBCUs. Get to it, colleges and universities. Get to it. Call it whatever you want to call it. But the programs that we fought for to make sure that our children had access, them not going nowhere. You're not going anywhere. They're going to be right here because we, the people, are going to demand that they're right here. And if the Christian fundamentalists can make sure that their children don't get vaccinated, which is why they spread measles all over the damn place, if they can make sure that they have access to an education that only teaches them that God created the earth in 7 days and in the entire universe and everything that we know in 7 days, and they don't want nothing about evolution or actual science, if they can make those demands because they know their power as parents, what can we do? I'll tell you what we can do. The first thing you can do is get your school's calendar, your PTA in the school, in your calendar. Get your school leadership team. If you got a PTA and a school leadership team, get it in there. Find out, well, you used to be able to go to the Office of Civil Rights to find out what the statistics were. You really can't do that much anymore. But go to your local Office of Civil Rights, your state level Office of Civil Rights, and look at the disparities. And then you go into the school principal and you go to the school counselor, you go to the teachers and you say, wait a minute, these disparities exist. I don't care what you call it, what you gonna do to fix these disparities. In fact, if you don't know, I know, because you know who told me? These people told me. You know who told me? Carter G. Woodson told me. That's who told me. So we got the information. We have an entire body of research called culturally responsive education. And it is a type of education that meets the specific needs of the children. Yes, race is a part of it, but even beyond that. And it's high time that a lot more of us get well versed in it as parents, as community members, because they're coming for it. They want Jim Crow back. And they will get it back unless we, the people, stand united. Now, some of you are concerned about how to do this work. I get it. We've talked about how you call your senators. We talked about how you call your elected officials, 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. And we talk about that, but some people are intimidated. I want you right now, if you are not yet following the Working Families Party on Instagram, follow the Working Families Party on Instagram. If you believe in third parties, I believe in the theory of third parties. The Working Families Party is one of the only third parties that I rock with. I vote Working Families Party every single time because they have a vibrant presence on the ground. They're not trying to start with the presidency. They start on the ground. They start with policies. They start in local municipalities and they work their way up. But the Working Families Party right now has a graphic, a series of graphics on their Instagram page called "So You Want to Call Your Senator, but You Don't Know What to Say." We got you covered. And then if you follow the graphics, it gives you a very basic explainer as to what happens when you call your elected official. Now, one of the things that you can do, if you want to make it even simpler, you can text the word Musk to 30403. Musk, not elongated muskrat, M-U-S-K, like musky, almost like musty, but you know, Musk. Text that word Musk to 30403 and they will send you a series of information. But what will also happen once you hit that text, your phone is going to ring. And with your phone rings, it's going to be an incoming call that will automatically connect you through your congressperson. Then they'll send you a text message that includes the phone number to call if you want to call later on. Once you're connected, you can speak with a staff member in your local elected official's office, and most likely you will be directed to leave a message. Now, if your senator is a Republican, here's what they say to say. Hello, my name is Lurie Daniel Favors. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and my zip code is yada, 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 yada. Now, why do you offer that information? Because it verifies that you're a constituent. That automatically puts you in the line of people that they actually have to listen to. Because remember what we learned from Indivisible last week. These people don't care about you if you are not in their district. So you identify as the person who lives in their district. Then you go on to say, I'm calling to ask Senator Republican to publicly oppose the massive budget cuts being pushed by Donald Trump and elongated muskrat. We need billionaires to pay their fair share so we can fully fund vital programs like Medicaid, SNAP, Head Start, and more. Senator Republican needs to make it clear that they stand with working people and not billionaires. Now, they're saying to call your Republican senators and congressional representatives because the Democrats are already on board with this. It's the Republicans who need the pressure, although you should be calling your Democrats too. And they provide a script for those of you who have a Democratic senator. And they say much the same thing, but essentially it is important that we get used to picking up the phone and calling because, as they say, a random billionaire is fucking with our personal information and all our money. They in the Treasury Department this week, they in Social Security this week, they dismantling the Department of Education, and we the people are going to have to stand up. YouTube, thank you so much for being with us. 866-801-8255. Oh, also get the 5 Calls app. If you are not able to keep if you don't have your elected officials' information in your phone, the 5 Calls app makes it very easy for you. But y'all, this is still a Lurie Daniel Favors show. We're doing more than just relying on apps. Yes, get the 5 Calls app, but also get these people name and number and email address in your phone so you can call them directly. 5 Calls app is amazing, but let's activate as many ways as we possibly can. 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. YouTube, thank you so much for being with us. Y'all, we got shit to figure out. We got some stuff to figure out because these people